Alright guys, we're here for our interview Friday, and today we have Chris Summers of Rear Naked Choke and his own independent freelance art, Chris Summers Art. I think that's right?
Yeah.
Is that kind of when it goes by?
Yeah, Facebook, Chris Summers Art of Chris Summers, something like that.
So I guess for the people who don't know you, I guess kind of explain who you are.
I don't know. I mean, I guess, I was born and raised here in Abilene, been here most of my life, moved away for a while, lived in Dallas, lived in New Mexico, came back here, and been back here ever since, man. I've been around the Abilene music scene a lot through my cousin Mike, who played in a lot of local bands and stuff, so I was always around that. Used to work at a store called Modern Music here before it shut down, and so that's about it.
Alright, well, we'll get into the music part, but kind of the most interesting part, and I find out even today that a lot of people didn't know, is that you're actually a comic book artist.
Yeah.
Man, how does somebody get into doing that?
I don't know, man. I was into comic books since I was a kid. Started collecting them when I was probably 10 years old. Actually got Anthrax, the band Anthrax. Was one of the things that kind of got me interested, man. Seeing they had like guitars and they had the song "I Am the Law" from Judge Dredd. It was about Judge Dredd, and that kind of got me interested in it more so. I mean, I'd had comic books around, since as long as I could remember, but really got into the collecting part. I was like, oh, the song's about somebody in a comic book. I want to check that out, and so I started, track those down. Found that there was actually a comic book shop here in town. It's not here anymore, but and that was like a whole new thing, man. I had no idea, and so since that point, that was like what I wanted to do was be a comic book artist. And it took quite a few years. I went to school. I went to ACU for a while for graphic design, but it wasn't until I moved up to Dallas area and was taking care of my son while my wife had a better job than I did, so I ended up being a stay-at-home dad, and I had some time and started looking at comic books and decided now was a good time to try to get back into it. And I just looked at the process that comic books are, especially, mainstream comic books. Smaller independent stuff, there's sometimes it's one guy that's doing everything, but with the mainstream stuff, it's an assembly line, and you've got a writer, you've got a penciler, you've got an inker, you've got a colorist. And so I kind of looked at that assembly line and said, what do I want to do? What do I enjoy the most of it? And it turned out to me to be the coloring and the digital painting side of it. And so I just started, luckily, with the internet and everything, I was able to get online. I found some resources, found a few websites with some forums that other professionals, at the time that they were using, and started learning. And once I got to a certain point, I started going to comic book conventions. There was a comic book convention in Dallas called Wizard World that was coming through. Went there with a portfolio, started showing it around to other people who, were professionally coloring comics at that time, and got the feedback, and then just kept working on it. And the first break I got was doing what's called flatting, which is the boring part of coloring, where it's taking the black and white artwork and creating a layer where you break individual components on the page down to colors, a solid color, so that way they're easy to grab and to work on. And I started doing that on Green Lantern for a guy named Moose Bauman. And then from there, just kind of kept working on it and started making more contacts. And they would send me pages of quality artwork, and I would do the flats, and then afterwards I would actually take and color the pages, and then I would send them to them for critiques. And so that's what I just kept doing, and just kept working on it until I got to the point that I felt like, they felt like that I could start submitting it. I started submitting it to publishers, and got my first major book was working on G.I. Joe. So that was pretty much it, though. There's a lot of work, man. It's work, networking, and just continuing to try to get better at it.
So I know you said you listen to Anthrax, and that kind of helped you get into comic books. Like, I'm a big Coheed fan, and
Right.
they have their own comic books and stuff like that.
Right.
does a band that has something to do with comics make you want to listen to the band more, or does it make you want to like look at the comic because you know the band does it?
I think it could be a little bit of both. For like I said, for me, the Anthrax connection with the Judge Dredd, I probably would never have, or wouldn't have known who Judge Dredd was, at least not then, for a long time. So that definitely brought me to, into checking that out. With like the comic books that are associated with like Coheed Cambria, there's people that still have no idea that that's even that there's a band even involved with that any of the members of the band, I think it's the writer, right? He's the,
yeah, cool.
They have no idea that he's even in a band, and then there's some people that have no idea that he's ever written a comic, So I think that it can do both, both ways, but I don't think that it's necessarily one way or the other. But for me, sometimes I'll check it out because of my involvement with both, in a sense. It'll make me kind of check out the book or the music. But I think for some people it definitely can, and I think that there's a lot of people that don't even know that there's such a big association. I mean, there's actually a surprisingly large number of of books and stuff out there that and there's a big association of music, especially rock and metal, with comics. There's quite a few. I mean, Scott Ian from Anthrax has actually written some comics as well. I think the guy from was it My Chemical Romance?
Gerard
Way, yeah. He's written some comics. I think Lock and Key, I think and don't quote me because
I think he did something during the Black Parade album.
Yeah, but I think the book was called Lock and Key that he did, and it got a lot of like critical acclaim and stuff too. It was a really good book. I never personally read it, but
I know a lot of wrestlers have gotten into comic books too.
Yeah, so I mean, but it's surprising. I mean, even the number of comic artists that are out there that also play music. One of the Batman artists, Greg Capullo, fantastic guitar player, has played in bands for a long time. So it's pretty crazy the crossover there really is.
So I've heard it a lot from Miles and Jared when they do their R2 Drink 2 podcast, and they debated a lot. So do you think like today, like maybe not as much as is in the past, but today with movies and the Netflix and stuff like that like the comic book culture is more normal than it used to be?
I think it's more accepted than it used to be. I mean, whenever I started collecting, I mean, it was considered kind of, as kind of a geeky, nerdy thing, and in a lot of ways it still is. But that geek nerd culture is more accepted now, and it's not. People would when they'd say, what do you do? I mean, I've been doing working in comics for over 10 years now. When I first started, people were like, well, what do you do? Well, I would say, I'm an artist. And they're like, oh, well, what kind? And so finally, whenever I'd tell them, I'm a comic book artist, they'd be like, well, but what do you really do? I mean, it was like, you can't, that's not a real job.
Yeah.
And now, if I say that, people are like, oh, dude, that's awesome, And you get a lot more of that where people are a lot more accepting. And I think it's because with things like the Marvel movies, even though you've had some comic book based movies throughout the years for a long time, you've had some, and some that have done really well. It wasn't until I think the Christopher Nolan Batmans and the Marvel movies started coming out, the Captain America, the Iron Mans, those that kind of really opened up people's view that, hey, there's it's a little more acceptable, or there's something more there,
That there's I think a lot of it is just that people just saw it as a cartoon, and they didn't see the storyline with it.
Yeah, they didn't. I mean, it's always been, and there's still a group of people you'll find that are like, that still have that mentality that comics are for kids. But if you look at comics now, there still are comics that are for kids and that are for younger kids. But really and truly, I mean, comics now have evolved to a form that, anything from, the age 10 up to in your 20s. I mean, there's comics out there, that are targeted to that age.
I know,
that's more
like every comic I've ever read, even when I was younger, it wasn't really a kid comic. Like, I read a lot of the Ninja Turtles, which was very R-rated.
The original Ninja Turtles, very much so.
Like, my favorite comic is A Killing Joke. Very R-rated.
Yeah, very.
A lot of the Batmans were R-rated. So I don't know if I've ever really sat down and read a kid comic.
Yeah.
So I guess that's why it's always weird for me when people are like, well, it's just kind of a kid thing. I'm like, well, have you actually read them?
Yeah,
Because
well, I
they're
mean,
kind of...
You know, even if you look back at, and in like starting in like the late 60s and the 70s, I mean, Spider-Man was tackling, you know, issues like drug abuse and things like that. You know, you got into, in the 80s, you had Green Lantern and Green Arrow teaming up and going across the country fighting like drug dealers and stuff like that. They even had, you know, Green Arrow's sidekick Speedy became a heroin addict. You know, I mean, that was so. I think that because of the fact that whenever comics were first published, you know, back in the, you know, back in the,
Well, even like in the 40s, it still seemed kind of adult because they were fighting Hitler. I mean, I guess you could say as a kid...
They were, but if you looked at if you go back and read some of those, because I have some of like the collected editions that show some of the early Batman stuff and the early, you know, Superman 7, even Fantastic Four, they're cool stories, but they're very simplistic.
Mm-hmm.
They're very simplistic and real one-dimensional. And so I think that because of that, they were easy to grasp for you know, kids. The colorful pictures and stuff, you know, made it instantly kids were drawn to it, and then the stories made it easy to grasp for kids. And while they may have been attacking some or dealing with some modern or some of the current situations and everything that were going on, you know, during that time period, things like, you know, Hitler and stuff like that, it was told in a real simplistic way. And so I think that's where, you know, it was considered more for kids. And then, of course, you had the kids-based comic books. I mean, I remember whenever I was, you know, like 4 or 5 years old, my grandmother had a beauty shop, and I had an aunt that used to come in, and every time she would come in, she would bring me Richie Rich comic book or Hot Stuff. You know what I mean? Those were definitely, you know, based as a young kid. I mean, there wasn't anything. And so there was a lot of that, you know, and I think that just that perception kind of, because it was all, you know, you went into a store, back then you go to a convenience store, you know, and there's a rack of comics, and they were all together. It didn't, you know, it was the little kids comics, and then there was Batman, and there was Daredevil, and there was Spider-Man or whatever, but they were all together. And I think that's where that mentality came from, is that it was a kids thing. And so, you know, there's still some of that mentality, but I think it's a lot less now.
So, like, we've talked about it before, and like I've talked about it a lot because I'm a huge DC fan because I love villains more than heroes.
Right.
But what do you feel like is the issue that where Marvel, their movies are just straight up amazing, and their TV product, though, isn't really?
Right.
Where DC is great on TV, but their movies aren't really living up to it. Like, where do you feel like the difference is?
I think the difference has been that there's several reasons. I think on the movie side, Marvel's deal has been, once they took, there were several Marvel-based movies that came out that were less than stellar. Fantastic Four is a good example. And the thing that Marvel saw, I think, with those was that at the time Marvel actually sold the rights to other studios.
Yeah, that's why we can't ever get Spider-Man and freaking Deadpool.
Yeah, but there you go. But although there's talk now,
I don't think it will because of the money.
You'd be surprised. But you know, so you got Fox, who owns the rights to make Deadpool and
don't they have Fantastic Four?
I think they have Fantastic Four. I don't remember who has.
I know they have X-Men.
It's X-Men. I don't think they have. I don't remember if they have Fantastic Four or not. But whoever has Fantastic Four, you know, so they've got the rights to make the Fantastic Four movies. Marvel is not involved other than in just is using their characters. Mm-hmm. Marvel learned real quick that, you know, they're not, if their characters aren't done well, you know, in a movie setting, that it doesn't translate. And so I think where Marvel right now is really excelling with the ones that are their creations is that they go, okay, look, this is what makes the character popular. This is what made people love the character. We don't want to change that. we may have to change the costume a little bit to work within a movie setting, that kind of deal. But we don't want to change who the character is. And so they're hiring people and they're working with people that seem to get that get who the character is at the core level. And then that translates well. And they're like, we want to bring the comic book to the theater. Whereas DC seems to go, okay, we've got this character who's popular. What do we need to change to make him work for a movie? And I think that it's that core difference in mindset in the movies that's really been the issue. Marvel wants to figure out how they make the movie work for the character, where DC wants to make the character work for a movie. You see what I'm,
So, but then why does the TV the exact opposite? Because DC's television is straight up amazing.
It is.
I mean, Marvel's getting better with their Netflixes, I think, with Jessica Jones and
Daredevil
and all of them,
right,
and coming out, I think.
There's Iron Fist, there's the Defenders.
So, I mean, their Netflixes are getting better.
Their Netflix,
their actual, TV is
like the Shield,
awful.
Agent of Shield. Here's the thing, I've been watching Agents of Shield, and I actually enjoy it. It feels like a Marvel universe that's been made extra safe, if you will.
Now, I do know, the main character, she, started complaining at, some convention that supposedly, she feels like Marvel doesn't get behind them. Because it is weird that S.H.I.E.L.D., you go to the movies, and S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't really integrated into it. You don't ever see Captain America come in the S.H.I.E.L.D. or anything like that.
Well, and there's a big part of that is because you've got a TV show that's filming 13 episodes, and you've got a movie, and so they film those 13 episodes over the course of a year. You got a movie that's taken 2 years to develop. So the problem comes in that it's hard to integrate what's going to happen in S.H.I.E.L.D. into the movies. Now, if you recently in the S.H.I.E.L.D. series, you're seeing some mention and some integration of what's happened in the movies. Mm-hmm. So they're able to make the changes in the movie or in the TV series quicker than they can the movies because of the nature of how long it takes to film one of those movies versus how long it takes to do the series. But I know that a lot of the creators of the movies are not wanting to be constrained by what may happen in the TV series. So from a lot of the stuff I've read and people I've talked to, there's a little bit of a disconnect between the deal, between the TV universe and the movie universe. Now with the Netflix series, there's the ability for them to work a little more closely with it. I think the other thing with S.H.I.E.L.D. is that it's on network television. And I think that it's at the time slot that it's in, they've played it a little bit safer. From my understanding, next year, S.H.I.E.L.D. just ended for this season. Next season, it's actually going to move to a later time slot. And they said one of the reasons is they want to get a little more gritty with it. They want it to have a little more feel of like Captain America, Civil War that just came out, or in Winter Soldier. So they're wanting to try to bring that over a little more. So I think they're learning from it, and I think they're trying to. It feels like they're learning where they need to integrate the two together. So, so that's what's going on the Marvel side. Now, when with the DC side of shows, I think the like Flash and Arrow are great. I think they do a really good job, and I think that Flash especially is done a really good job of catching who that character is. Arrow was good too. I enjoyed it. It's really a lot of ways it's a total departure from the comic itself.
Yeah.
It's a total departure really from the comic series, but it's still a really good show. And I think one of the main reasons though that those two have done so well is that they involve Jeff Johns, who is a comic writer, who's a great comic writer, and he's been a big part, and Jeff Loeb, I believe, as well, has been a big part of creating those series. And they're guys that are in touch with the comics. I mean, so they know what's going on with comics. and so they understand those characters. And I think that's why the TV shows have done so much better than the DC movies. You know.
Do you think the movies would be better? Because I've actually, like, they want to bring in, like, they're doing the Justice League, and they're going to finally bring them all in. Do you think the movies would be better if they brought the TV characters over?
Yeah,
I know a lot of people are like, man, they're trying to get different people.
Yeah, I think it's kind of silly that they don't. I mean, I think that Grant Gustin, who's doing Flash, does a fantastic job on the TV show, and there's no reason why he wouldn't work in the Justice League in the movie. You know, I don't think that there's any real reason other than I think the mindset of Warner Brothers as a company is that we need to have big names, and if you're doing a TV show, you're not gonna, you know, it's just doesn't.
I think it's a little bit they're trying to figure it out, just because I've seen stuff where, like, after the Deadpool movie and then after Civil War, where, like, Warner Brothers has, like, they've kind of, like, redone Suicide Squad.
They've gone back and to reshoot the last third of the movie. They've been doing reshoots because they did a couple of early test screenings and everything went great, but they said the last third of the movie things kind of fell apart. And I think that there's quite a bit of fallout that's going on from Batman versus Superman. I went and saw the movie. It's not terrible.
I think they just did too much in one movie. Like, I feel like with Marvel, they spreaded it out where, it's taken a while to get here. It's taken, like, almost, like 10 years, it seems like, from the first Iron Man movie to get here. But it's kind of worth it. And then I also think the reason why Civil War did good is basically because they got Spider-Man. I don't think if they got Spider-Man, it wouldn't have been as a big pop.
The Spider-Man deal made a pop, but it still, even without Spider-Man, it would still would have been.
I mean, it is a good movie because he isn't in it all that long.
Right, but I mean,
I think maybe 30 minutes the whole movie.
But I mean,
I think that's why a lot of people came, because it was, oh my god, it's Spidey in a real form, not this dumb form.
Yeah, but I mean, like I said, the Spider-Man element though of the movie as a whole is a pretty small deal, and it really wouldn't have impacted the movie as a whole if he hadn't been there. But him being there was an extra thing.
I think it did, because to me, that was always my biggest beef with, like, the Civil War or even the Avengers altogether, is that, to me, Spider-Man's in the Avengers and he's not in the Avengers, and he's not there, and it doesn't feel like the Avengers to me.
Well, but he wasn't there in the beginning of the Avengers, and that's kind of the deal. I mean, Spider-Man came into the Avengers a lot later, and he's, you know, and so I get why he wasn't there early on.
It's like with Deadpool. I mean, they can go a couple movies with Deadpool, but I think by, like, the third or fourth one, somehow you have to have Spidey involved, just because Deadpool and Spider-Man have such a tandem together.
There's been a lot of connection, but you know, like I said, I just think that you know, there's been a lot of fallout from the Batman Superman, and I think Ben Affleck did a good job.
I think he's an awesome Batman, but he's also a real Batman fan, so he understands it.
Yeah, but they've now, from my understanding, and I think everything hadn't been, like, totally revealed publicly. They mentioned some things, but there's been a little bit of a shakeup on the Warner Brothers side of for their movies, especially, like, for their superhero movies, and they've actually brought Jeff Johns in. So not only is he a big part of the TV now, he apparently has got a very much expanded role in working on the DC movie universe now and trying to get that more in line with the way that it should be. So it looks like they're finally maybe understanding that, hey, quit messing with the characters. Don't make Superman a killer. Don't make Superman dark and gritty. Superman is not dark and gritty. And whenever he and Batman have been together in the comics, that's always been the big, you know, I'll use a big art word here, the juxtaposition between the two characters is you have Batman, who is dark and gritty, and you have Superman, who is bright and shiny, and them having to figure out how to work together creates a dynamic that wasn't there, because you've got a Superman who's kind of dark and gritty and brooding, and now you got Batman who's the same way. Well, I just
feel like they tried to combine too many comics in one movie. Because you had, like, the Dark Knight, where you have a Batman who's generally older, and then you're trying to do another comic in there where a Batman is younger, and you're trying to make them fight, and I just think it was too many. And then you try to have the beginning of the Justice League, and it's just too many individual comics into one movie.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, and I think that again, I think that's true, and I think that it could be done better. But it's just. I think that they're learning from their mistakes, and I hope that the Justice League, apparently, it's getting some revamping. Jeff Johns apparently is working real close with Ben Affleck on a Batman movie.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that some of the qualities that make the DC TV series so great will now start to be brought into the DC movie universe.
I think a lot of with the movies too is with DC, they're constantly changing actors to their roles.
Yeah.
Where with Marvel, I mean, you've had the same Iron Man the whole time.
Right.
And you've had basically the same Captain America the whole time. And I think when you start changing roles, only one they've really changed a lot was really Spider-Man, but they didn't really have control of that.
Yeah.
But I think if you change roles too much, like, I think that's why like, with DC, their animated movies are so good. Because, one, you have, basically every movie basically has the same Joker. You have Mark Hamill coming in almost all of them.
And even though the styles make it look a little different, you have the same character, and they're acting the same way, in a lot of ways.
And I think that's a lot of where DC... If DC can keep the same characters, like when they do the Batman movie, they have to have Jared Leto as Joker, I think. Yeah. Because he's in the Joker Suicide Squad, and there's supposedly like a big fight with them now since they've redone it.
Right.
So I feel like if he does a Batman movie and you do a Joker, you have to have Jared Leto do it.
It depends. It all depends, because I think that we'll have some interest, because the whole Joker thing is still kind of up in the air. And I'm waiting to see Suicide Squad and see how that turns out, because there's a lot of theories out there about who he really is. Is he the original Joker?
See, I think from what I've seen, all like the 4 trailers I've seen, I think they're trying to do it as the original Joker. They're just trying to make him more of an insane Joker, I think is what it is.
I mean, it's possible.
Because here's the thing with it is, you have the beginning of Harley Quinn, when they're trying to do the backstory of Harley Quinn,
right,
which is the original Joker. It's not the Robin Joker.
I know that.
So you can't have the beginning and the brought up of Harley Quinn with the Robin Joker.
Again, but we're talking about DC, who the Warner Brother, the DC movie side, where Warner Brothers has made lots of changes to a lot of things, and I think that a lot of the changes they make have been on that deal of, oh, well, we need to modernize this and we need to do this. And they ignore a lot of the core things, and that's what I think has been the problem. And I think that
I don't know if they'll go that extreme, though, because, I mean, there's already enough people already crazy about Harley Quinn being changed enough with her outfit, which I don't personally care. I think it looks cool, but I don't think they would go that extreme. If they do, I think it would really, really, I think it hurts every DC movie ever after. Because
we'll just have to wait and see, because I don't know on that one, and we'll just... like I said, I think that's a big part of the deal is the disconnect between those two things. I think that's been DC's biggest problem, is that they think that just the name and the basic idea of the character is enough, and they can change everything else to suit what they feel like would work as a movie, and they lose the whole character. And so I think that's been part of the problem.
So I guess other than drawing, you're obviously in a band.
Right.
So have you... I know you got into playing guitar, like you said earlier, because of Mookie.
Right.
Did you always want to play guitar, or did it just kind of happen really later in life?
No, I mean, I remember, Mike was the one that kind of, inspired me to want to play guitar. But even whenever I was young, 13, 14 years old, I had a guitar and I played. I just was never real serious in it. Art was my main thing. That was my main thing, and the guitar was just kind of off to the side, and I would play it for fun. I'd pick it up for a little while, and then I'd put it down, and I'd pick it up and put it down. I'd get frustrated and put it down. And it's been that way. It's been that way through most of my life. Truthfully, until I joined, RNC, man, I never learned to play a whole song all the way through. I would know parts of this song and parts of that song and that kind of deal, but I never really learned how to play a whole song through, because the majority of my efforts artistically were into my comic work, and trying to get to that point. And so that was my main hobby at the time. Once things changed and I started doing comics as a job, and it became my full-time job, all of a sudden now I needed something to do in my off time, because I love drawing, I love art, but after working on a book and having a deadline and being up for almost 48 hours straight, working on a trying to get all these pages done, so they can go to print. The last thing I wanted to do was sit down and draw or anything for a few days, but I needed to do something. And so I started picking guitar back up again. And so I'd been fiddling around with guitar for a few years, and then we moved back here to Abilene, and I'd been back for a little bit, and Mike called me up and was like, "Hey man, me and Mick and Cody and a couple of guys, man, have got a little thing happening. But Eric, our other guitar player, man, he's got an RP12 and it sounds terrible. Can you come over and see if you can help me out?" Because he knew, I used to work at a music store, and he and I always talked about gear and stuff. And so I went over there, and one night for their practice band, and played with it a little bit, and dialed it in and got a pretty good sound for it. And I just started kind of hanging out because it was fun. It got me, out of it. And long story short, eventually Eric left the band, and I'd been working with Mike. Mike had been showing me some parts because he was wanting to, put in a lead here, that kind of deal. So he'd been showing me parts of songs so I could play along with him, so he could start working on things. And basically they just said, "Well, the stuff, why don't you just grab your gear and, come on and, start playing guitar." And so that was kind of how I got into it. So, I didn't get real serious about it really until I joined the band, but I've played guitar on and off, for the majority of my life, just never real seriously.
So what, I know, like, even since I've known them, there's been a lot of different changes. So how do you feel like the evolution of what Rear Naked Choke is from then till now?
Then to now, I think the core is still the same. That first 6 months or year of it, the only position that really changed was I came into guitar when Eric left. Since that point, we've had a couple of drummer changes and a couple of bass player changes, but all through that time, the core was really, Mick, Mike, and myself, and we're the ones that kind of kept pushing forward. Obviously, a couple of years ago we lost Mike, and so Josh came in to play guitar. But I think that the driving force behind it, hasn't really changed, other than the fact that Mike physically is no longer with us. But Mike's spirit is a big part of it, especially for Mick and I, and Cody as well, who's back, playing drums for us now, and I think that there's a big part of that that's pushing, that pushes that forward and everything. But so I don't think it's changed a whole lot. We still have that drive to try to be what we are. We have a little bit of an identity musically. We have kind of what we do, and even the newer things that we write still seem to fall within that. And I think that's a reflection of the music that myself and Mick and Mike enjoyed and wanted to play. So despite the lineup changes, as far as on bass or whatever, I think that the core is still there.
So I guess having a core and then having someone I guess, leave the band the way that Moogie did.
Right.
How does it change a band, or how does it make a band better if it does?
I think right now it changes, obviously, because, I mean, nobody could replace Mike. And Mike had a style and a sound that was him, So obviously that can't be replaced. And so there's going to be a little bit of change sonically there. But I think how it changed for Mick and I especially, and I think Josh too, because even though Josh wasn't in the band, Josh had been around it. Josh was Eric's brother, so he's been around it. He was around during the beginning of it. He's been around through the whole thing, even before he joined, and knew Mike real well. I think for us now, not only is there a deal of we want to be the best we can be, we want to put out music that we like. I think we now feel a little bit of I don't know if responsibility is the right word, but we feel like that there's, we have to fulfill a certain thing because of Mike. You know what I mean? I mean, he's an additional driving force behind it, and because we want to make sure that we can get the music that he's helped create, out there for as many people as possible to hear, whether it's just playing at shows or whether we can, get it on the radio, however, wherever we can get it, we want to help share that. And because, Mike's part of that music, that's always going to be, that's a part of him that will live forever, with us, and that we can share with everybody. So I think that that's added a little bit of of an extra push, of an extra responsibility, that we've got something bigger than just me or Mick or any individual in the band. We've got something a little bit bigger to help push us on. So
do you feel, because I know when Mike was live and I helped you with it a lot, do you ever feel like you'll ever do Mookie Fest again?
I would love to. The biggest issue has been one time between the band picking up and doing more, and as being a freelance artist, man, jobs are kind of ebb and flow,
Yeah.
And, luckily, things have been a little bit on an upswing, so I've been busier with that. So time is a factor, and we've got a lot of people that are willing to help. But the other big factor is that we haven't been able to find a place that we can have it and keep that feel that we had before. And so I think that's been the biggest problem. And I'm constantly, looking for places, and we've got a couple of ideas now that we're kind of floating around.
I don't think that place that we did that one show at would be too bad.
The place?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the areas that we're looking at that could be a possibility. And that kind of is something that we're floating around. And so, but when we do it, we want to make sure that we're able to do it well and do it right, and put some planning in. So I don't think it will happen this year, but I'm hoping that through the rest of this year we can start getting plans together, and maybe next year be able to bring it back. Because that was when we threw the first one, obviously, for Mike to help him with the with the costs and everything that he had going on with dealing with the cancer and the treatments and everything. He wasn't real big on it. He at first he was like, no, I don't want people to do that. That's. And once he realized it was happening, whether he liked it or not, he started thinking about it, and he was like, well, because if I've got to be the first one to go through it, then I want to let's keep it going if we can, so we can help more people that are having similar issues. And and so we were able to do it. We did it a couple of years there, and we were able to help some people out. And then unfortunately, Mike passed away, and that made it that year. That made it really hard to kind of do, and still dealing with the whole trying to find the right place for it. It's just kind of been that's been the big derailment. And so, but hopefully, that's still something we want to keep going if we can.
So what do you feel like through the rest of the year, and I guess beginning of next year, what are the major plans for RNC?
Right now, we're still working with CJ Pierce from Drowning Pool on our album. We actually just finished up all the drum tracks a couple of weeks ago. In between Drowning Pool's little tours that they were doing, they had a bigger tour. They had a little break, and we went in and finished up drum tracks with him. And then they had a smaller tour that they just got back from. He's got a little bit of time now, so he's matter of fact, talked to him yesterday. He's working on some guitar tracks we were able to get along with the final drum tracks to get those cleaned up and ready. And then we're hoping that maybe we'll be finished up with everything, hopefully in July as far as the recording part goes. And then by the end of this year, we're hoping to be able to have the album out. That's the plan right now. In between that, man, we're just we're getting out there, trying to still get out there as much as we can and play. This weekend, we're going to be in San Antonio. Then the next weekend, we're going to be in Fort Worth. We're going to be in Dallas, along with some hometown shows here in Abilene. So just continue to trying to get out there and play as much as we can and get this record done. And then once we get this finished, then we're going to try to. We've already been talking to a few people to try to get something set up and maybe go out and do a few small extended dates. Maybe a couple of weeks. And try to hit as many areas as we can in Texas and in the surrounding area, and just kind of start trying to spiral our way out, outside of the area and continue to expand that. But it's the same as always, man. We just continue to grind away. And
I was talking to Brandon because he's from Orange County.
Right.
It kind of has a little bit, if you've been there, it's a little similar area like kind of we are, where it's kind of secluded from every major area.
Right.
And we have like a very homegrown base network here, where you start from the bottom, you work your way, and you have to push it. What do you feel like? One, how does that help you from having to start that way? And then, what do you feel like your biggest frustration with the music scene in this area?
Starting, man, with the homegrown deal, you've got to get out there and work. It's not like some areas where,
because there's like a lot of bands. Like he even said like he took who was it? I think it was. Man, I can't remember who it is off the top of my head, but it was like their 5th show they ever played. There's been a couple of shows I've done with Rise Record bands where their very first show was here in Abilene.
Right.
They're from Oregon, but their first show was here.
Right.
So, like, recently, I guess, it's been more of who you know. You get a producer, they put you on a record, and then you're on a tour.
Right.
So do you feel like doing it the way, like, we have here is better in the long run, or is it just get it done with the... Because music's not a very long-term span anymore. It's very hard to have a 10-year career.
It is. It is in a lot of ways. But I think that the bands that have to start small and build things up have the ability to have a longer career than the bands that are able to go, okay, look, we've got a couple of really cool songs and got this producer, and now he's going to make it sound really good, and we're going to put it on here, and now we'll go out there and we'll play. But they can't live up to the expectation of such a big start. Whereas when you start and you build, you learn. You learn how to get out there and how to play a live show, how to engage the audience, how to sound good when you're out, on the road, or when you're, playing live to a room of 5 people and putting on just as good a show as a room of 500 people or 5,000 people is a big deal. And I think a lot of these bands that don't have to go through the times of playing little bitty shows and not having to build up that audience, and kind of getting that chance to just go, from their garage to, a second stage on Warped Tour or something, because they happen to they're able to get a hold, get that producer, and that producer is able to get them a good song and able to push them. I think that there's a lot of problems that you have, and I think that's why you see that drop off so quickly now versus when bands have to build themselves, and it takes 5 or 10 years before they even start to make a blip. They've honed themselves up to that point. And so when they're able to do that, it's a much better product in the end as a whole, you know. And so I think that's a big reason that you see a lot of that, and I think that's a big reason why you see a lot of that drop off, and why bands that are, you know, that build up versus are able to just take off will last a lot longer and will put out, I think, better quality as a whole, you know, in the end.
So what's your biggest frustration with stuff around here? Because, I mean, we've had talks about individuals and places and circumstances, but
sure,
like, if you could pick one thing to just eliminate from, like, this music scene that you feel like if it's gone, it'd make everything better and blossom and just take off, what do you feel it is?
That one's tough, man. One thing, I mean, there's several things that I think are in any music scene, but
a lot of mine, I feel like, is diverse. Is the not really, I guess, the division that there is.
Yeah, and I that's probably the one thing that I feel like is the worst thing, is that division or negative attitude that it seems like a lot of people have. I understand, you know, I mean, everyone should feel that their band is great.
Yeah.
But I think that they're like, the whole deal of we're better than, or I'm better than. I think that there's a lot of that that I think creates that division.
Well, I don't even think it's really much as division with the bands, because I feel like there is,
yeah.
But I feel like the bands are kind of like, for the most part, that the bands that are still left
True.
are still like connected.
Yeah, I
think
agree.
more of the division, like, I guess for me on my side, is the fan side.
Well, yeah.
Where, like, there's that 2 years where, like, live at the back room and stuff, everybody came together for everything.
Right.
Where now you don't see that. Like, you won't. There's individuals who, no matter, like, if I put you on a show with two younger bands,
Right.
yeah, it's Rear Naked Choke, and they may not have played here in 3 months, but the other two bands are too young, and, well, I can't go drink there, so I don't want to go see Rear Naked Choke.
Right.
And I feel like that division hurts a lot too, because you don't have the older crowd teaching the younger crowd what to do.
Right.
And you don't have the younger crowd keeping the older crowd that has that young feeling with the show.
And I get that, and there's definitely some of that. I think there's definitely some of that.
I feel like the art of passing the torch off, like it used to be, like when Gary and them were in No Comply and all of them, you had younger fans that would go there, and they kind of showed us how to do it, to where now it just doesn't do that now.
Right.
It's just kind of, there's that cut.
Well, and I think that, you know, there's, and we've talked about this part, but it's a hard balance to find. I mean, we don't have a whole lot of venues in Abilene right now. We have a few that are really good for shows, but not a ton. And the majority of them are bars, you know. And you know, when it comes down to the you know, the end of the day, for a bar, it's a business. And so they want to bring in fans. They're going to bring people into the bar to make them money. And that's the difficulty for young bands, is that their audience isn't that. They're not the bar scene for the most part, you know. And, you know, their audience is younger and either can't get into the bar, or if they can, they don't drink, obviously. And it's not, a lot of times, it's not a environment that they're comfortable with. So it makes it difficult in that sense, you know, that you don't have a good place that can work for both sides. And yeah, and I mean that makes it difficult. I mean, I think that, you know, I don't know that there's a big, you know, a way to fix that.
I think the
here.
only way really to fix that is to have, like, a venue that has a bar but lets everybody in.
Yeah, well,
because
I
if
mean,
you go to everywhere else, and that was always my thing with the back room, and I'd get onto it, it was like, you go anywhere else in this freaking state, anywhere in this country, they have that. Like,
yeah.
It's not an issue.
Right. Well, and I think that you know, and I think that's the biggest thing, is finding a venue or finding a format that would work. You know,
because you're still going to have your people who drink. They're
Right.
still going to come, and yeah, you're going to have people who don't drink, but there's no difference from, like, 4 or 5 years ago, there was all of us who were old enough to drink, but we don't drink.
Right.
Like, bars probably don't like me and you because we don't drink.
Right.
So even though we're old enough and we can go into those places, we do them still no good anyway. So I feel like you could still do it, but I understand some of it's that liability too.
Yeah.
And I get that, like, if you start it from, like, scratch, like, you have a bar and you just let them in, I know you get that. But I think if you, like, I guess, show them and grow it into that kind of a concept, you kind of start taking, you'll still have it, but it's not as a big deal to where you can go to, like, the trees in Dallas.
Right.
And there's no issue of seeing, like, a dad and his kid together.
Right.
And watching shows.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, but you got to think, like, Trees isn't a bar that just kind of operates as a bar for the most part. It's a venue. And I think that's the deal, is that there's not if there was a place that was just a venue here that was, you know, it could still have a bar, but there was a venue that didn't operate as a bar the rest of the time, I think that you would have a lot less issues with it. I think the problem comes in when you have the venue is a bar itself, you know, and so it runs as a bar, you know, every day of the week, regardless of if there's music or not going on. And when there's music, it's a bar with music. And so I think that's where the problem comes in, because it opens those places up to that liability issue. Whereas a venue becomes a different issue. You know, just like, you know, if you have we have a concert at the Civic Center or at the Expo Center and they have alcohol sales, that doesn't matter. It's for a show. It's a venue. It's not a bar that's having a show. And so I think that if you were able to find something, you know, if something like that could be created here, that would alleviate a lot of that problem, and I think it would work. And that's how you would have to kind of do to bring things together. So I don't know. I mean, I would love to see something like that. I would love to see some more places here that are set up for music to be kind of the centerpiece.
Didn't they say they were trying to build one over there by prime time? I heard something like they were trying to build a venue out there.
I've heard quite a few different things, but nothing seems to develop. So, you know, it's just one of those things. But I think that if we had some that were a couple of places, and I mean, we have a couple of good places, don't get me wrong, that are, you know, that have great music and everything, and are cool places, but I don't think we have any place right now that is really a music venue. Even if it's running as a bar, you know, the majority of the time it's like a music venue. And I think right now that's a downside of the scene right now here, that we don't have a good place that feels like it's a music venue, even if it's a bar. I mean, you know, you go to Dallas and you've got Curtain Club, and you've got you used to have like the Boiler Room. It's not there anymore, but
you got Tomcats.
You got the Rail, and I mean, those are the Rail. You know, those are music venues. Now they may be open during the week and not have a band playing. You know, and so they're a bar and people come and hang out. But at its core, it's a music venue.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we don't have right now that is lacking. And I think that if we could get a place that was like that, even if it was open, like we were talking about, even if it was open as a bar most of the time, but it was its main purpose and its main feel and identity was a music venue, then it would be open to a lot more shows and the ability to have that multi-age group show, you know, between the younger bands and the more established bands to you know, kind of start bringing that, you know, combining that back together. So
all right, so is there anything you want to leave, I guess, with the band or with your art? Any sponsorships or anything you want to plug?
And, you know, we got some cool local people. We've got Red Alpha Custom Prints who helps us out with a lot of our hats and stickers and all kind of stuff like that. Ruben's a great guy, and I've done some artwork for him, you know, on the commercial side of things, you know, with vehicle wraps and stuff, doing some design work for him. So that's always a lot of fun. Obviously, you know, Mick's Shop Screaming Ink downtown. You know, that's the place that gives us a place to practice. You know, if he didn't have it, we wouldn't be we wouldn't have a good rehearsal place. and everything, man. Guys at Rock and Roll Gangstar have been really cool to us. In-tune guitar picks. I got my favorite pick, the only place that has the pick that I really like, so they're really cool. So we just we just appreciate everybody that helps us out, man, and supports us, and we try to go out and support as many people as we can around here, and just appreciate Abilene and all of our fans, man, giving us staying back there, staying there with us and helping us keep pushing forward.
And if anybody doesn't realize, we're at Hastings.
Yeah, we're sitting at Hastings, so you
got the coffee and the comic books and
the door
ironies.
Yeah, all kinds of
So
fun.
that's your fun sounds in the background. But all right, well, it's been about an hour, so I guess they're tired of us talking. Guess we'll play some Rear Naked Choke songs. So I appreciate you talking with us and speaking your mind.
Appreciate it.
All right,
Later.
peace.